So with the Railtrack sales pitch citing a figure of 1.4 billion to keep these structures up to scratch, and our leaked document suggesting over 10 billion should be spent, who should we believe? What do industry analysts think of this?
I think the amounts in the Railtrack prospectus are somewhat optimistic, for the reason, first of all, that they're based on historic figures of what British Rail was spending in the last 5 years or so of its life. And we know there is evidence that British Rail was not spending enough to keep the network in a reasonable state, in a constant state, that it was in fact deteriorating.
If the figure in excess of 10 billion is realistic, the profitability of Railtrack would be very low. It would not be attractive to investors in that case. In the short term, the investment would be attractive. In the longer term, when investment actually has to be carried out, which it will eventually, this will impose a great financial liability on the company. It would undermine investment opportunities.
Did Brian Davies think the figure of over 10 billion was realistic?
Well, it's a multiplier of 10 on the Railtrack figure. I don't think it's a very high figure, however, and knowing the people who wrote the report, I think they would have erred on the side of caution in that the figure that they have quoted they can fully justify, and perhaps could have increased it, but they haven't.
So the actual costs could be much higher?
Yes.
In fact, Dispatches understands Railtrack did have other, even higher figures. They came from W.S. Atkins, a consulting engineering company based in Surrey. But these figures don't appear in the Pathfinder prospectus either. The Pathfinder prospectus does contain a letter from W.S. Atkins. It certifies that the Railtrack figure of 1.4 billion is accurate.
In our opinion, the estimates have been properly prepared from the available records and the professional opinions of Railtrack staff.
But a source at W.S. Atkins, who wishes to remain anonymous, told Dispatches that the company originally came up with figures considerably higher than those in the prospectus and the York report. Our source claims the figure for bridges and other route structures was as much as 5 times higher, a cost of 50 billion. What happened next is unclear, but our source told us that a Professor O'Hagan from Nottingham University was brought in. He's developed a model for calculating future liabilities and was called in to assess the figures. The professor's calculations resulted in a much lower figure being produced. Professor O'Hagan has confirmed that he worked on the figures, but W.S. Atkins asked him not to talk to us. In a statement, Railtrack said,
"The Pathfinder prospectus contains relevant information on the estimated expenditure required over the next 10 years. In relation to track and associated structures such as bridges, these estimates have been subject to detailed review over several months by W.S. Atkins, an international consulting organization with significant experience of up-to-date methods for assessing future maintenance requirements."
The rail regulator is in charge of getting a fair deal for all Railtrack's customers. We asked him about all this. He told us he had no responsibility for either the drafting or verification of the prospectus. That lay with the government and Railtrack. He didn't answer our direct questions about whether he'd seen the Atkins research or the York report, which Railtrack received in March.
By the time this report was received by Railtrack, the revenue the Railtrack was to receive had been determined by the rail regulator. To go ahead and fund then an investment of 10 billion or in excess of 10 billion would have made the company unsaleable.
So if Railtrack only spends what they say they will, not what others think they should, what does this mean for our railways? What kind of system will be taking us into the 21st century?
You've got to be desperately concerned, haven't you? Because the end product of that is that if they persist in doing what they say they're going to do, you will end up with unsafe track or lots of speed restrictions, which will render the services, the train services uneconomic, or you will end up with a lot of line closures.
Others suggest that it's the taxpayer who may end up forking out. Railtrack's main source of income is from what are called access charges, paid by train operators to use the railway system. But a shortfall in revenue could end up with us footing the bill to keep our network on the rails.
The fact that it will cost more in terms of access charges by definition must be right, because what the Railtrack has been set up on the basis with an asset base on which it will make a return of an acceptable percentage, which means that the access charges have got to be able to generate that. To get the access charges to that rate, that's not going to come out of the customer and the fare-paying public, is going to come out of the government and the taxpayer.
So what's really on offer today on discount day? This is the one commercial they won't be showing you.